All right, welcome to The Explainer. You know that t-shirt you're wearing? It didn't just magically appear. It went on a super precise, high-speed journey that started with a single roll of fabric. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most critical parts of that journey, the industrial garment cutting process. Let's dive in.
Really think about it. We're not talking about one person with a pair of scissors here. This is a high-stakes, high-volume operation where just one little mistake could ruin hundreds of garments. So how in the world do they get every single one to be a perfect clone of the last?
So, this is what we're working with, a master flowchart straight from a real factory floor. Yeah, looks a little intense, right? But trust me, this single document is the secret sauce. It lays out every single step, every decision, and every person who's responsible in the cutting department. And we're going to break it all down, step by step.
Okay, so before a single blade even thinks about touching fabric, there's a ton of prep work. Think of it this way. Every minute they spend here saves hours, not to mention a whole lot of money later on. This is where they lay the foundation for a perfect garment.
And really, this is the main idea for the entire cutting room. Every single thing they do in this first stage is designed to stop a domino effect of errors down the line. You mess up here, and it's not just a small mistake. It could literally wreck the whole production run. So yeah, no pressure.
All right, so here's how it all gets started. First up, the cutting manager gets two super important documents. The master pattern, which is basically the DNA for each piece, and the cut order sheet, which tells them, hey, we need 500 smalls, 1,000 mediums, and so on. Then, and this is really important, the fabric itself has to be prepped and tested. Once all that's in place, they do a little test cut and send it off to quality control for the final green light. Only when QC says go does the real action begin. So let's zoom in on one of those prep steps for a second. Fabric relaxation. See, fabric, especially the stretchy knit stuff, comes on these giant rolls and it's pulled really tight. If you just cut it right away, poof, the pieces are going to shrink back to their natural size and suddenly your medium t-shirt is more like an extra small. So they let it chill out, sometimes for a whole day, to make sure everything is stable and the size you cut is the size you get.
Okay, so the plans are go, the fabric is all relaxed and ready. But now you've got all these different puzzle pieces, right? Sleeves, fronts, backs, collars, and for a bunch of different sizes. How do you lay all that out on the fabric without wasting a ton of it?
Well, the answer is something called a marker. And this isn't just a plan, it's pretty much the master plan. You could argue it's the single most important tool for making sure everything is high quality and the factory actually makes money. So what is a marker? Honestly, the best way to think about it is like a giant life-size game of Tetris, but with pattern pieces. It's a huge paper printout that gets laid right on top of the fabric. The whole goal is to cram all the pieces you need together as tightly as possible. Why? Because every single centimeter of fabric you don't use is literally money saved. This is where you see this amazing mix of human skill and cool tech all working to cut down on waste.
And if you look at the flowchart, you'll see this is a very specific job for a specialist. The marker man, that's their actual title, is the person responsible for creating this perfect roadmap. It doesn't matter if they're using fancy software or drawing it by hand, their skill has a direct impact on how profitable the factory is.
Okay, so we've got our fabric, we've got our map, but remember, we're not just cutting one t-shirt, we're cutting hundreds, maybe thousands. The whole point is to cut a whole bunch of layers at the exact same time. But how on earth do you do that?
And this, my friends, is where all that careful prep work finally pays off. It's time to go from big rolls of fabric to the actual pieces of your clothes. So first up, a person called the layman, you can see it right there on the chart, carefully stacks the fabric, one layer on top of the other, making sure they're all perfectly lined up. This big stack is called a lay. Then they place that marker paper, our Tetris map, right on top. And that's the cue for the cutter man to come in with this massive, powerful vertical cutting tool. And they just slice through the entire stack at once, following those lines with insane precision. Okay, the cutting's done. A huge pile of fabric is now thousands of little individual pieces. But hold on, we are not done yet. In fact, one of the most important steps is coming up right now.
So how much of it do you think they check for quality? A small sample? Maybe 1 out of every 10? Nope, 100%. Every single piece.
And it's not just a suggestion, it's written right there in the flowchart, plain as day. A 100% cut panel inspection. You've got a quality inspector whose only job is to check every single panel for any little mistake, a bad cut, a flaw in the fabric, anything. Because if one bad piece gets through, it can ruin the entire garment later. Nothing gets a pass here unless it's perfect. All right, so the pieces are cut, they've passed the super strict inspection. What happens now? You can't just shove a giant pile of fabric bits at the sewing team, right? This last stage is all about organization, making sure the next team in line has exactly what they need to get their job done.
And this is where the real organizational magic happens. They take what looks like just a chaotic mess of fabric parts and turn it into a perfectly ordered system where every single piece is accounted for and ready to be put together. And here's how that works. First, every little piece gets its own number. That way, it can be tracked. Then, they group together all the parts needed for just one garment. So, 2 sleeves, a front piece, a back piece, for one medium t-shirt. That all gets put together in a bundle. Then, they double-check those bundles against anything special, like a panel that has a logo printed on it, to make sure everything matches up. And finally, once it's all good, the bundles are sent off to the sewing lines.
And that brings us to the very last step on our flowchart. The input in charge gives the final thumbs up, and the OK goods, as they call them, are officially passed on. The cutting department's job is officially done. The baton has been passed to the sewers.
So there you have it. We started with a simple design and a roll of fabric and watched it go through this really intense, super detailed process of planning, mapping, cutting, inspecting, and then organizing. It's actually a pretty amazing system of precision and control when you see it all laid out.
So now, the bundles are all ready to go. Each one is basically a little kit, a future piece of clothing just waiting to be assembled. And that, of course, leads us to the next totally fascinating part of the factory, the sewing floor. But, well, that's a story for another